I was working with paramedics, and we got to talking, and I asked one of them what the most difficult part of the job was, and his answer was, it's the kids. And he told me a story about a call that he had responded to about a 13-year-old boy that had been pretty badly, severely hurt. And he picked the boy up. They picked the boy up from the home, and the boy's father had beaten him pretty severely. And as they were transporting him to the hospital, he said to the boy, what happened? Why did your father do this? And the boy said, it's Tuesday. And that was it. It can be anything. It doesn't matter what it is. You'd never know what you're walking into. There is no predictability, and it just becomes part of everyday life. And if something becomes part of everyday life like that, it just changes the way that you view the world, and you no longer necessarily even think of it as a traumatic event. It's just life. So part of our challenge is to help people see that there can be a different life.
She doesn't want to talk to you, man. She doesn't want to talk to you.
Oh my God! No!
No!
Stop it!
I don't understand what you were thinking. Tell me exactly what happened.
Nothing.
Nothing. Doesn't look like nothing. You know I have to submit a report to the judge.
Who are you texting?
Texting a friend. What do you care?
Let me see your phone.
I'm not gonna let you see my phone. It's my phone.
I don't want to violate you, Manny, but this doesn't look good. What were you thinking?
It's not as simple as just like a person.
Are you stupid or something? Let me see your phone.
Fucking call me.
Yo, Mario, what's up?
Come
Come here.
Get off of me! I have nothing to
Hey, man, why don't you leave her alone?
I was thinking, I gotta do something.
Well, you sure did something.
A lot of times youth grow up in two different worlds simultaneously. One world in which there are rules and laws that govern behavior and what you should and shouldn't do. But then they grow up in another world where there is violence in the home and violence on the street, and that's just the way that things are, and you have to toughen up. The challenge for them is negotiating when do you apply which set of rules.
She doesn't want to talk to you, man. She doesn't want to talk to you, man. What are you going to do about it, huh?
Oh my God! No! Stop it!
You're off her. Leave me alone, man.
No! Stop it!
Because oftentimes they grow up in these environments, they don't necessarily have a sense of other ways of being. I so badly want to say, oh, you need to stop drinking, you need to stop smoking, stop cutting, stop fighting, but we have to first back up a little bit and say why. Why is this person doing what they're doing? Because on some level, what they're doing is working. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it.
That should be it. Because I steal one. Yeah.
Children and adolescents who have experienced chronic or multiple traumas, beginning at an early age and often at the hands of their caregivers, really often have a range of difficulties, a range of significant difficulties that cut across areas of functioning and impairment and across different diagnoses, and this is often referred to as complex trauma.
What I often see in my work is that children who have experienced trauma are often misdiagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that sometimes there isn't a comprehensive enough history taken related to the child's experiences. Having experienced trauma can also look like problems in development or behavioral problems.
Part of our challenge is to look at these problematic or difficult behaviors as coping responses, really. They're representing the child's best effort at coping with a very difficult life circumstance. So, for example, if you take an adolescent that's grown up with a lot of community violence, he may physically assault a peer at school for threatening him or disrespecting him. And while doing that might get him suspended or kicked out or some sort of criminal consequence, he's also earned respect from his peers, and he's also proven that you can't mess with him. So if you grow up in an environment where violence is the norm, and it's just part of everyday life, you no longer start to think about that as unusual. So if somebody says to you, have you ever been physically abused? Well, no, I'm hit every day.
I told you, I don't want my baby around anyone who's violent.
It was just something stupid. I don't even know what happened. I would never hurt our baby.
How am I supposed to trust you?
Randy! Give me some water! You hear me talking to you, boy? I said give me some water! Hurry up! Don't make me get up! Hurry up! It's always something with you, you stupid! You retarded! Stupid! It's always something with you. I don't want that kid anyways. I fucking told you.
Interview 4, take 1.
Without a trauma lens, the children in a classroom may appear that they're the most difficult children to teach. They have acting out behaviors, or sometimes they're withdrawn or they're numb, and they don't seem to benefit from the educational day that the teacher has prepared. I think that's a very frustrating situation for a teacher who comes to the profession wanting to teach, but if they don't understand behavior and they don't have the trauma lens, that can lead to a teacher that gets easily frustrated.
Hey, bud. Seems like you've been having a hard time. Do you want to talk about why you've been getting in fights? Not getting along with the other kids in your class?
Without that trauma lens, our school system is geared to labeling children for maybe a disability or maybe as incorrigible or disobedient and maybe oppositional behavior disorder, things that are really hard and that child should leave the campus and leave school or maybe get suspended or expelled. But that dialogue is different with the trauma lens. You tend to find out what's happening, if the child is eating well, if they have shelter, if they have an adult at home that's taking care of them.
How's school, Manny? Good. It was good. Did you do anything fun? No. Is that boy still picking on you? No. Good. Did you tell him who's boss?
Our children, they spend so many hours of the day at our school that schools can be the area that really provides that safety for many of our children who don't have it at home or in their communities.
Manny, wait up. You have to stay close.
Also, I've heard that you've been having trouble paying attention. Focusing on your work? Would you be willing to tell me what's bothering you?
Manny! Manny! What's up, man?
Working in the schools, to me, it's a miracle that they come to school. You know, we get stories sometimes where a family will show up with two 3, 5 children or their families and their cousins, and they just had a death the night before. And they're dealing with everything they have to deal with, something horrific, but they bring the children to school. And the children are coming to school, they're being taken to their classrooms, and they're saying, by the way, this is happening at home. Our kids are at home, and this is what we have to deal with.
Hey, what's good, Manny?
What's going on, my man?
How's it going?
How you doing, man?
Leave my brother alone.
Hey, girl, how you doing?
Where you
How
going?
you doing?
Yeah, where you going, huh?
Hey, that's my boy, Nick.
Manny. Manny. Manny, you're not in trouble, okay? I just want to know what's going on.
Fuck off!
What the hell? Where you going, huh? Where you going? What's up?
Oh my God! Manny!
For us, it's really easy to say, this child does not have the skills to be in this class or to be in the school or has broken all the rules. That tends to be the child that gets suspended or gets expelled. Trauma work means working with those kids that need us the most, and many times that behavior is the difficult, challenging, to look at that behavior and say, wow, what is he telling me, or what is she trying to deal with, and to really find out what's beneath that behavior. Many times we're quick to make that phone call or call the parent and suspend and send them home, when in fact they need to be in school. They need to learn those skills, and they need to know that we care enough about them, that we want them to be successful, that we are going to teach them and help them adapt to the educational setting.
I think the potential for misdiagnosing trauma or the effects of trauma as something else are quite large. One of the things about trauma, I think, is that the reactions to trauma fluctuate. One day a child might look very, very subdued and withdrawn and appear depressed, and another day they might look out of control and hyperactive as though they had ADHD. One thing that is quite common to see in children is that they may be on 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 medications at the same time. The psychiatrists and the pediatricians treating these children are trying to help them. And so when one thing doesn't work, they try something else and they add another medication, and so there's an accumulation of attempts. If someone comes in on several medications, that begs the question, why are they on them? And perhaps they're not working. And if they're not working, that may be because we are not treating the right thing. Certainly for families, for parents, it might be much easier to think that your child has a biological illness, rather than that your child has been exposed to things that are so disturbing and so profoundly affect every aspect of children's lives. For parents, that's not easy.
Oftentimes, these youth move in and out of systems because of the different diagnoses and labels that they receive, and often lead to the labels of being a bad kid at school or ending up in the juvenile justice system. And so what often happens as these kids move in and out of these different systems and have these different labels, those labels get carried with them to the other system that they move to. And then the child themselves may actually have an understanding of themselves as being a bad kid, as being a troubled kid, versus really having a true understanding of what may contribute to those difficulties. And I think that's oftentimes the fault of us not having a trauma-informed system of care across the board.
Look, I know you love your kid, and that's a beautiful thing. But you have to start working on making better choices if you want to keep on being the man of your house, and that's real talk.
A lot of clinicians are just uncomfortable inquiring about trauma experiences. because it gets into asking very difficult questions, or they might be mistakenly think that they're going to do more damage if they ask questions related to trauma experiences, or sometimes they just minimize the impact that trauma can have on a child's development.
If you don't ask that one important question, why? Why is this child inattentive? Why is this child having difficulty with his peers? Why is he blowing up at people? Then you don't know. It's entirely possible that he does have ADHD and he does have bipolar, or maybe it's purely a trauma response.
It's really important to really take a step back in letting them know that this is totally normal based on what you've gone through. It's not just about having a supportive therapist, it's about really finding strength, finding support in their community, because that really is what's going to sustain them on their path to recovery.
You gotta think about your life, Manny. Think about all the good things you've accomplished. Just work on making a better life for our son.
I love you.
It's about giving them a different perspective. And then it's not just that different perspective, but then that hope that that's attainable for them. Because even if they have that perspective, sometimes they'll say, oh, but that's for other people. That could never be for me. And when that happens, I think that my job as a clinician is to give them that hope and hold that hope for them, that it might be possible.